This is Adam Russell. I'm here today in conversation with Professor Brian McGrath from the New School, New York. We're discussing his work with digital modelling, cinemetrics and urban design.
When digital technology was introduced into architectural practice, ironically it just reproduced the mechanical architecture system of representation. Instead of drafting on a drafting board, you were drafting within AutoCAD. I'm interested in modeling not as it's usually conceived of, as making a three-dimensional representation of something, but modeling as part of a creative process, an ongoing reiterative creative process, and entering into a kind of communication feedback loop through more web-based tools such as Google Earth or SketchUp, 3D Warehouse, that start to disseminate different ideas of the city more horizontally. Both those terms come from Foucault's work, and so archaeology of knowledge, and then was when he was trying to understand how ideas and statements of knowledge get created in time. And so his archaeological approach is different than a historical approach. It sort of looks at the ruptures in time, what are the phase changes. And so as an urbanist, what are the ruptures in the city fabric or in the history of the city that create new conditions for change and new opportunities to reimagine the city? So if the archaeology does sort of register those shifts or ruptures in the genealogy looks like Darwin did at descent of in order to understand the evolution of a species, but also emergence. What does that tracing of an evolution of a species tell us about the potentialities for further development, biological development for Darwin, but for my interest in urban development. So by kind of tracing the descent of certain, say, public space in a city, can you begin to imagine the potentialities for the transformation or the creations of emergent kinds of public spaces. The recombinant urbanism gives us a very simple general theory of the city, that any city is composed of enclaves, armatures, and heterotopias, and it's the various recombinations of those basic urban elements that are constantly being reconfigured by various urban actors and agents. One of the projects that I did that resulted from that work was something for the Skyscraper Museum called Manhattan Time Formations, and in that it explores how New York City's business districts evolved in space and time. And so it's a four-dimensional model that gives time a vertical dimension. And so so what you see is successive periods of office building booms and then busts, and how the city reorganizes itself during building construction calms, let's say, and versus the kind of storm of construction, and how the city has remade itself during those periods. Ecology began with an idea of nature outside of cities, and so there was, if there was an ecology, it was an ecology in cities. And Ed Bacon, the master planner, his book is called Design of Cities, and so we became much more interested in design in cities, in this ecology of cities. So it's design in the ecology of the city instead of design of cities with ecology in them. So that's a kind of a nice little coupling. The Reading New York Urbanism was really based on and influenced on a love in the way cinema depicts different points of view of those kind of flows and interactions between psychological processes and social dynamics and relationships between the built and natural environments. The computer affords us this camera eye view of the world, as well as a kind of planimetric or typical architectural orthographic view of the world. This ability to immerse yourself in the environment that you're kind of designing from above as an architect with the traditional architectural tools led me to try to formulate a cinemetric kind of set of tools that allows us to operate between these two conditions. So here we're doing two exercises. We're doing a kind of 24-hour cinemetric exercise where groups of students are documenting the city through strict set of rules based on 3 film directors, and through that diagramming these urban enclaves, armatures, and heterotopias, and how they manage flows over the course of a 24-hour cycle. So we use videography as a sensing device, as an information database gathering device rather than a pictorial device. And so at the end of this 24-hour kind of videoing exercise, the students begin to map the spaces that they've been videoing, both kind of morphologically as the way traditionally it's done in urban design or architecture, but also through different kinds of movements that happen within that space, and also to try to get a sense of duration and time, and how do we begin to map and model duration and time in these urban dynamics. So what the students have been capturing are these incredible moments of blockage and porosity between institutions and older fabrics of the city, and parking garages and small alleys that served small row houses, big museums like the Powerhouse. I kind of reconfigured my practice from architectural base to urban design base, and with a kind of specialty in new media and ecology, and so I'm very interested in this how to get out of the client-based mode. And so currently architects work for a particular client, and so it has an institutional bias or a governmental bias or a private developer kind of bias that's part of any project. And in urban design, it's most interesting when it engages many stakeholders, such as the project we're working on now in Ultimo. How do you do that without a single client? And so, so you begin to need to be less object-based and less single user-based, and start to use these techniques which foreground the dynamics of the city and the kind of spaces in between institutions or building types that are typically what the architect focuses on. I mean, architects have an incredible spatial imagination and can handle complexity and are used to working with different fields, but every time architects tried to face it alone, they've failed miserably. And so I think it's both the expanded architect in the sense that an architect who isn't just thinking about building, but also the engaged architect who's part of a kind of network of other expertise, and really learns how to operate and work with ecologists or financial planners, marketers. So it has to be a dissemination of the architectural knowledge throughout a much wider field instead of just that small 5% of building productions.